All right, to the book review. So I'm doing this a bit differently now. What I've started doing is a book club on my Patreon. So if you join the journal tier or above, you get included in the book club. So what that involves is I put up a list of 5 books each month, and everybody gets to vote of which book they want to read next in the series. And then during that month, we'll read the one that's been assigned. And at the end of the month, we all get together, if whoever can get together anyway, get together on a Zoom call, and we just discuss the book. And I go through the book itself and everything else. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that recording, chopping up, so taking out all the bits which are personal to the people in the recording itself, apart from myself, and giving the kind of presentation of the book. It's a review and a discussion at the same time. So and then doing that for the book review, discussion, etc., going forward from now on. That's how it's going to be done. All right, so that's why today's video will look a bit different, going on from this part, obviously, and what to expect. So this month, or this was actually recorded on the, I'll just grab the, what was it? This was in May 24th. So yeah, as I said, if you want to get involved in the book club itself, so you can discuss it all up front before these recordings get released on here on YouTube, do go over to Patreon, sign up for the journal tier or above, and get voting. All right. Without any further delay, here's the review and discussion of Living Spirits by BJ Swain.
So generally, I actually thought when I started reading this, I thought BJ Swain was actually a traditional witch into folk magic and stuff like that. So when he started going through the grimoire tradition, and in a very, very analytical and scholarly fashion as well, which I thought was great. It was a great viewpoint on everything, specifically how the grimoires work and what is Solomonic magic versus the other grimoires and things like that. It was fantastic, but I kept waiting for this traditional witchcraft to kick in, and it didn't really do that. So I had to go look, and it seems like he's not. He has some interest. He's had some interest over the years. He mentions it in the book in regards to what we might call low magic or folk magic or things like that. I mean, he does bring up the ancestors, which I thought was quite an interesting inclusion. And he also mentions that, in ceremonial magic, and that flowed into Wicca, because Wicca came out of ceremonial magic. The ancestors are not included. So, and this is why so many people nowadays are missing that whole aspect of ancestral veneration in their practice because it's not included in Neo-Wicca, which is where most people actually enter when they start spirituality or going down those roads. Um, but yeah, so he started out with all the grimoire tradition and everything else, and then he started going through all the spirits. And when it got towards the end, specifically with the chapter on the pentacles, Solomonic pentacles, that was a bit of a letdown, because it was a misinterpretation of what the pentacles are. And and then he started going into hoodoo, and he knows some stuff, but it's apparent that he's just missing out a load of history. So I think he should have completely left those out, absolutely just not even included them. So it starts off um, with actually presenting quite an animistic worldview, which I thought was really good. Good. Another reason why I thought he would be going in the direction of traditional witchcraft, or witchcraft in general, even, because he brings in this animistic worldview, which is not really something that kind of gels too greatly with ceremonial magic and Golden Dawn, Thelema, and stuff like that. Um, I'm not going to read all of these passages because we'll be here for hours if I do. But then, I mean, this is starts like page 9. Then page 10, he then reinforces it. He says now, about 150 years into the occult revival, things are changing. Magicians are returning to an animistic view and are embracing the reality that our world is alive and that we are not the only spirits out there. If that's from a ceremonial perspective, I've got a feeling it's because things are starting to. We used to have very kind of, well, not absolutely, but more of a kind of defined paths. So you were a ceremonial magician, you were a Wiccan, you were a witch, etc., etc. And I think those lines are getting more and more blurred nowadays. So it's nice to see, I must say. I like this examination of the words exorcism and oath and stuff. So the word exorcism comes from the Greek ex, exorkismos, something like that. It's all Greek to me, which itself comes from the Greek word horkos, and horkos means oath. From horkos, we get the word horkazane on this, and then ultimately exorkismos, meaning to bind by oath. The word exorcism, therefore, at least in its origin, refers to the act of binding a thing to a particular oath. I think understanding the origin of that word is very important when you're working with spirits, specifically if you're working grimoire tradition, grimoire magic, because you are the exorcist. And why is it called exorcism? When we think of exorcism now, most people's brains go to Catholic priests forming, pushing the devil out of people. Um, but it's because you actually bind it with an oath to do something, and that's the exorcism itself. Moving on to conjure also. So you get exorcism and you get conjure. And conjurare, however you would pronounce that. Excuse my very bad um, uh, interpretations, pronunciations. There you go. Itself is also a compound word coming from con, meaning together or with, and jurare meaning to swear. So the Latin conjurare initially included the idea of binding things together by oath, such as to make a conspiracy, and this eventually became the meaning of the Old French word form of the word. So again, you are binding the spirit to an oath. And this is actually why a lot of modern demonologists don't like these words, because you don't want to bind the spirits to something. And an oath is a promise. Um, you know, too many people kind of like willy-nilly just decide, oh, they're going to create pacts and oaths with spirits that they don't even know. And because, that's what they do in the movies. So it's cool. And it's a bad idea. But yeah, binding spirits to oaths works from a grimoire perspective, but feels a bit disrespectful. And I must say, BJ Swain does come from that background of angels are good, devils are bad, or demons are bad, and angels therefore control the demons, and that's why we have to go through all these conjurations. But I'll get to that as well, because that's something we need to talk about. I did find it curious that when you're doing conjuration and exorcism, like, I mean, if you go into Wicca, for instance, there's the exorcism of the salt and the exorcism of the water and stuff like that. And the understanding within that practice is that what by exercising the salt, you're driving out the negative forces. Because you say, you are pure, I make you pure and everything else. And you're using divine names, even in Wicca. In Wicca, you might use the names Caninos and Aradia, for example, instead of God, Jesus, and Mary and all that. But you're still using divine names to bind the negative forces to an oath that they will therefore then leave. Something to that effect. But I found it curious because I don't believe that prior or pre-Grimoire, pre-Catholic, I don't think this actually formed part of any practices. So it kind of fell into the Catholic basis then got transferred into the grimoires, went into ceremonial magic, and then found its way to Wicca, and then to neo-Wicca and neo-paganism. Um, but yeah, I don't think it actually um, got into any pagan formats. I like this because this is what I'm always saying in regards to the Goetic spirits. He said, when you have allies in the spirit world, they become a spiritual currency for you or spiritual street cred. I like that because the way I kind of talk about the Goetic spirits is that if you're in the club, it's kind of like a biker's club. If you're in the club, you're in the club. If you're not, if you get rejected, don't go back. Stay far away. But when you're in the club, you got the street cred, and he does speak about it here and there. Yeah, I'm actually going to skip over a lot of this, but he one of the main things he actually talks about in here, which I think is brilliant, and I think it needs to be spoken about so much more, is the intermediary spirit. And in some cases, this is considered to be the HGA or the higher self or the personal daimon or whatever it is. It's that spirit which is between you and divinity and kind of brings the messages to you and kind of sends the devotions and offerings and to divinity itself. But if we want to work with spirits, you need that intermediary spirit. In the Grimorium Verum, for instance, it's Skirlin. So what you do with the Grimorium Verum, you call Skirlin, then you call one of the three heads, I call them heads, which is either Lucifer, Beelzebub, or Astaroth. And then under those are the other spirits. So you call Skirlin, then you call one of the three, and then you call the spirit you want to actually work with. But you've got these intermediary spirits. It's the one that uh, controls the crossroads or the doorways or something like that. Okay, then he goes into ancestors and how it's kind of skipped Wicca, which I've already mentioned. It does seem to focus a lot on the idea that the ancestors are um, mostly blood relatives. He doesn't kind of go into it too much where they are just extended family, people we've loved in life, teachers, mentors. I like to include pets. I think they are family. Um, so a bit of a bias on that particular front. Oh, I like this bit. In the graveyard, we can call upon the individual dead. We can find the markers for the space where their bodies are, but their power radiates. Their bones form a structure that ties that power back to the earth within the graveyard. So the whole space is alive with the power of the dead, but in a conjoined fashion, reflecting the life and power that seeps forth and joins together and connects the spirits of the cemetery. This power helps empower the cemetery itself and gives power to the soil separate from the power an individual grave holds. I think that's important. And that's why when we go to do graveyard work, we often connect with, or we should be connecting with the keeper of the graveyard, which is this collective energy which is formed in that space. The keeper of the graveyard kind of protects, looks over everything. Um, right, I've made a note here in the preparation, charism, and intermediary spirits chapter. Oh, I just said the progress from ancestors to elementals to nature spirits and onward is a great approach. Yeah, it kind of starts off with starting with the ancestors that love you, going into the elemental forces, and then going into the nature spirits, which are a bit bigger, and then going into kind of like a bit bigger, celestial, etc., planetary, etc., etc., etc. So I thought it was quite a good progression through the book. I did find this interesting. So, despite the kings being four, they are not elemental, they are directional. The kings are essentially the powers of the crossroads. They control the movement of things in their given direction. That's something to consider because we do call, depending on which ones we're working with, but we do often call them the elemental kings. And if they're the Paracelsian variety, or they are the modern demonology variety with Lucifer, Flerius, Leviathan, and Belial, or if they are the archangel variety, Raphael, Michael, Javriel, Uriel. we tend to they tend to be elemental aspects, the embodiment of the elements themselves, of the four directions. But if you go into a lot of traditions, and you find this in traditional witchcraft as well, traditional witches don't often work with the elements in this regard. They don't place the elements in the four directions. The four directions become the the it's the movement into the other worlds, and therefore you have your compass round, which kind of like is your map. It becomes your map, and you move yourself between worlds, so you can step from this world into the next world. Um, so they're actually directional, not particularly elemental in some traditions, but I wouldn't say all traditions. I think he's talking about Hades here. No, he's talking about Paracelsian elemental spirits. Just go back. He says the kings are not referred to as elemental, whereas the spirits next in the list are referred to as elemental. Oh, okay. So what he's referring to here is that the you have the spirits of the four elements, but the kings that rule over those spirits are not elemental themselves, which kind of it doesn't equate with my brain. Um, he's probably thinking in a different direction than I am, but yeah, that doesn't equate with me. I consider them to be elemental. They are just the rulers of the element themselves. They are the embodiment of the elements. I made a big note here. Hang on. He said, some others suggest that the directions are elemental, but they are relative. Thus, if there is a landmass to your north, north relates to earth. If it is hot in the south, then south must be fire. If there is a sea to the west, then west must be water, and then east is left for air. But if you live in a place such that the physical world is arrayed differently, then your elemental associations are likewise different. Again, not the case. Historical magic does not seem to have been so mutable. I completely disagree with that. It was mutable. It always has been, and it still is mutable. Even in ceremonial magic, when you start getting to the greater rites and stuff. So I'm not sure where he's coming up with this. But if you go into heathenry and you go into traditional witchcraft, you definitely see it. What did I say here? Which places the mythical spaces with the physical landscape. Even reaching into Greek spirituality, which placed the gods on Mount Olympus, a physical place, not some imaginary mythical, otherworldly place. Yeah. So what the problem we have here is that if you go into older spiritualities like heathenry, traditional witchcraft, even Hellenism, Greek mythology and stuff, you are working with the compass. Then we go to the compass with traditional witchcraft. When you're working with the compass, you are not just um, putting down this two-dimensional compass which acts as a map. You're actually tying it to the land itself. And in the example I gave here, the Greek spirituality which places the gods on Mount Olympus, that was a physical place. It was an actual mountain. And you find this in a lot of old traditions where they actually have mountains and areas in the world that they consider to be so sacred that they become part of the divine. And so when we're working with things like the compass, we are pinning down the compass to physical things. So in heathenry, for instance, you wouldn't go and visit. A bit difficult to explain. You wouldn't put yourself into a trance state and then just use journey to go and visit an ancestor or a deity or something like that. You would actually go to a physical location, and you would go into that physical space in order to meet with the spirit. And by going into that physical space, you become, you go into a liminal state, you go into a liminal place and you are between worlds, but the physical place doesn't disappear. It's very important to the whole thing. So, going back to this. where he said historically magic does not seem to have been so mutable. Absolutely, totally disagree with that because the spirit world is overlaps. My language is very difficult here. It's difficult to explain in language, actually. It's an experiential thing, but I can probably say that the spirit world, the other world, the underworld kind of overlaps with our physical world. So we use these trance states, etc., to become liminal. So you go between the worlds and then you can step from one to the other. But it doesn't mean that the physical disappears. It means that it just they merge. They become one thing that we can work between. Um, so yeah, probably the easiest way I can explain it anyway. Okay, this is kind of his method of working. So when I work with the kings, I call upon the angel of the planet that rules the spirit I wish to conjure. Once the angel is conjured, I call upon the king, and he is bound to give access to the spirit and to allow the spirit to work in the world, to aid the spirit in manifesting my request, and under the guidance of the angel, limit the spirit from whatever I feel it should be limited from. This is very much a Solomonic grimoire approach, where you're controlling the spirit through some higher being, this higher force. Then his rituals are overkill, complete and utter overkill. I mean, he calls divine names, he calls gods, and then he calls Hecate, and then he calls the angel, the planetary force, and then he calls the king, and then he calls the spirit. Just one after the other after the other. And in his pentagram, oh, it's not pentagram, his pentacle example, it's the same thing. I'm not even sure why he's bothering to use the pentacle at all, because there's no use for it. It's called so many spirits. He's not even asking, or not even referring to the pentacle. He's asking the angel that he's called eventually to kind of do the thing. So I'm really, but I will say this. So a lot of people do this where they kind of like they do so many things in a ritual that something definitely works. So this is why the ritual works, because something you might have 20 things going on in the ritual, and one of those things actually is the thing that does the work, which gets you results. And this is what a lot of people do. They just put all of everything into the ritual because something's going to work. The problem is, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. A lot of people do it and it works. It gets the results. And that's the thing you need at the end of the day. Do you get the results? Yes, then it works. The problem here is that when people come to this for the first time, they're new to this kind of thing, and they work these rituals. Yeah, sure, they get the results, but they don't know why. They haven't been given the opportunity to work with each bit individually to see which ones work and which ones don't, and understand them from a deeper perspective. They just throw everything and the kitchen sink at it, and they get the result, and that's all that matters. Yeah, but we need to also understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I just wanted to mention that because you see this throughout the book is you know, spirit after spirit after spirit after spirit being summoned. Also, the problem with Solomonic Pentacle stuff was that he considers it to be astrological magic or planetary magic. I think he calls it astrological magic, and it's not. Um, it when you work with the pentacles, you're working with the divine names. That's where the magic comes from, not the planets themselves. They are called planetary pentacles because they are classified or categorized into categories which the planets kind of embody. Like Jupiter is about increase and abundance and stuff like that. So pentacles kind of revolve around that aspect, fall into the Jupiterian pentacles. The ones that are about war, revenge, and all that stuff fall into the Mars pentacles. So it's got to do with the nature of the pentacles. They're just kind of like go into, but you're not working with the planetary forces. You're working with the divine names. And even in the case of the wheels, for instance, where you are calling the angels, which are very much the planetary forces. It's not just the planets you're working with. The planets are related to the Sephira on the Tree of Life. So you're opening the gates of the Tree of Life, really, by using the divine names. So it's the divine names you're working with. It's got nothing to do with planetary magic. So complete misunderstanding about that. And then he goes into hoodoo. And she says here, because it was frequently the magic practice of rural and poor people in the South, mostly African Americans. No, hoodoo comes from West African slavery. Um, and even now even extends into Southern Conjure and Appalachian magic. Well, I've got a little note here. That's a very colonialist way of looking at things. Hoodoo is primarily African American. Maybe there was some spillover into rural white areas with Southern Conjure and Appalachian magic, but hoodoo is very much about the West African slave ancestors. Um, so yeah, and then again, he says the first thing to address is work with saints. This is again hoodoo. Much of hoodoo comes from areas where the people are primarily Protestants. If you look at books popularly associated with hoodoo, they were rarely connected to Catholic forms of magic. The Psalms feature heavily, but not so much the saints. People today think of hoodoo in association with Latin American prayer candles connected to the saints, but these connect to other folk religions, and at times folk magic traditions. Hoodoo practitioners did adopt the use of this style of candle, but generally more related to particular powers or spell intentions rather than to particular saints. That is so wrong. The the African ancestors adopted the saints because if they didn't, they would have been beaten and killed by their slave masters. Forced to become Catholic. So what they did, they took the saints and they equated them with the Loa, and they kind of, Saint Papa Legba or Elegua became Saint Anthony, for instance, because Saint Anthony holds the keys. Um, there was this again, using psalms, using the Bible, incorporating folk or popular music. These are touch points our ancestors can recognize whether they did magic or not. Because he's right through the whole thing, he's talking about your ancestors of hoodoo. If you're not related to West Africans, you don't have hoodoo ancestors. It's as simple as that. But he seems to think that white people can have, and their ancestors kind of fit into this as well. I don't know. It's just a bit weird. A bit weird. All right, that brings me to the end of that. Sure, I think it was a great book, fantastic book. But as I said, it was great in terms of Solomonic and Grimoire magic. Um, Amazing examination of ancestors and the spirits of the various different spirits and things like that. But when it started getting into the planetary pentacles, it's kind of a misunderstanding of what they are, and then hoodoo just went way off base. And just you shouldn't have even included that, I don't think. But I guess that's my opinion.